All right, so I'm back with another video, and this one's going to be heavy in the polls, and this one's going to be ground game numbers, early voting, mail-in ballots. All of that stuff's going to be covered in this video, and I'm going to cover it from two separate perspectives. Both are pretty good right now as it looks for President Trump for being reelected. If you want to know all the numbers and you want to see a high level of the strategy of how this goes out, if you want to understand what the early voting means per the Democrat strategy, check this out and we're going to start right now. Hello, my name is Kyle and welcome to the channel. This is The Conservative Take. Here we take culture, TV, movies, and news and politics and filter it to you the right way. If this is your first time here, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss any future content. And if you would like to help the channel, please click that join button to find out how to do that. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the election, okay? I'm going to talk to you about 11 battleground states and what it takes to get to 270 electoral college votes to win. I'm going to show you why the polls are all over the place, why you hear on the mainstream media how Trump is being destroyed by early voting. But I'm also going to show you why Trump is not being destroyed. And in most cases, he's actually doing much better than he needs to do to get to 270. And I'm going to show you another case where he's actually on pace for a landslide. And you're wondering, Kyle, how in the heck can this happen? Well, it's really confusing in some ways. It's really convoluted and it's very subjective. So you're taking some guesswork into this, but at the same time, these numbers don't lie. And if you look at it from an analytical standpoint, you got to come out with the fact that Trump is doing what he needs to do at this point in time. The election right now is about 14 days away. This recording is at October 20th, 2020. And so these numbers are changing constantly. So in case you don't know, states are required to report their numbers as they come in by party. Some states don't have split out by party. They just tell you how many are requested in terms of mail-in ballots and how many people have come in to actually return the ballots or in person drop them off into like mail-in ballot bins that they now have to prevent it going through the mail. Every state is a little bit different, and we have a lot of things going on with the courts, different laws and different things in place. But we're not going to talk about that as much, but that will come into play once the election day happens, because that's my main first point, is what the Democrat strategy is. The Democrat strategy all along was to run up the numbers in early voting because they felt that they could have a huge lead when it comes time to November 3rd, that the Republicans would absolutely catch up, which they did in 2016, but they would make up any difference they would make up through later counting. So counting beyond November 3rd on into however long they want to find the votes they need to make up the difference. And that was their strategy. And that was a very flawed strategy, as we're going to talk about in a little bit here. So one thing I must say before I get started is that on election day, which is November 3rd, there will be the people who showed up at the polls that day and voted. And there would be the early voting people that voted prior to that. Those votes will be counted on that day. That's primarily what you'll see the night of election. However, that's not it. You still have absentee ballots where people actually requested a ballot and it was sent back to them. And you have the vote by mail, are the ballots that are sent out basically at random, to people, and they fill it out and send it back in. Those are the two votes that the Democrats are hoping to make up any difference of them being behind on election day. That's the plan. That was the strategy. And I have a couple links here I'll send you. One is from a thread by Larry Schweikart. He's a best-selling New York Times author, and he's done a lot of good analysis in the past on polling, and he knows what he's talking about. He talks about here in a long little thread here. I have another one here as well, but on Joe Is Done blog. And this one here talks about the same thing, but in graphical format. It's pretty interesting, but it's not going to work. And we're going to talk about that right now. All right, so let's get started with the state of Ohio for our first battleground state. This one's going to be the most likely, I believe, Trump's going to win. And it's going to be apparent when you look at the mail-in ballot requested and the mail-in ballot early in-person ballots returned. So the first number here is going to be the mail-in ballots that have requested, and here is going to be the mail-in ballots that have actually been returned. And so what you'll see here is that President Trump is leading in both categories by 5. And so 46% to 41%, and it's an increase of 157% from 2016. So we're seeing a lot more mail-in ballots because people are scared to go outside. Mostly Democrats. And the Democrats realize that they're going to have a hard time getting people to the polls because they've scared their entire electorate, where basically Republicans will, like Tim Pool says, will crawl over broken glass to vote. This is going to be pretty much a done deal for Trump. He pretty much, in my book, has a lock on Ohio because Democrats, remember, they have to have a lead going into this. They can't be behind on early voting. There's just no way they can win. There's just no way. So, Trump's won Ohio by about 8 points last time. He should do better than that this time, I would think, especially considering this and especially the information you hear later on. So with Ohio, we're going to tick that on. We're going to make him red. Okay. So next state we're going to talk about the state of Iowa. And I'm just going through the states here. I'm going to find the state and we're going to go through each one, and well, not all of them, but just the ones that are interesting. Now, Iowa is a little different because Iowa was won by Trump last time, but this time I think he is going to be a little closer because there's going to be, there's interesting errors that happened in Iowa last time with polling errors from 2014. And there's going to be a huge, much larger discrepancy for Democrats and Republicans. So here we have a 19-point swing here, it looks like, with registered voters versus Republicans versus Democrat. Okay. And so in this case, there's a much larger rural area in Iowa, which I still think is going to make up that difference. And so I think that Iowa will still be a closer win for Trump, but it will still be a win. So I'm going to tick off Iowa as being a likely Trump as well. All right. So let's go to the next state. It's going to be Arizona. This is another big one here. And in Arizona, it's interesting because Arizona was supposed to be a state that the Democrats were making huge inroads in. But if the Republicans can keep Maricopa County close, they don't have to win that, then they will be really competitive in the state. And if they can contain the leads in Navajo County and Yavapai counties, then for Trump, it's going to be a big deal for Trump as well. And also, it's been polling right now that Barris poll has the black vote in Arizona at 20%, which is a big deal. So by party affiliation, you see here that the Republicans are only down, looks like, by 14 points in early voting. And that's not bad at all, because again, the day of election, there's going to be a swath of Republican voters that's going to eat that up and surpass that plenty. So looks like right now, many people are having Arizona in the win column, and I do as well. All right, so let's go to the next state we're going to talk about. Let's talk about Florida. The state of Florida is right now looking at plus 14 for Democrats requested and plus 19 for Democrats submitted. So Florida, there's a lead of Democrats in Florida. But the thing about Florida is that it's looking more and more likely a Trump win, because based on the I-4 corridor coalition that Trump has and the Pensacola coalition that Trump has, those two combined should be more than enough to make up the difference day of election. We've seen a surge in Republican registrations, and essentially the Democrats need about a 650,000 vote lead to beat the Republicans. And right now, they're not quite there. If they get to that number, there's a different story, but they're not quite there yet. They started off really, really strongly, but they've since tapered off, because what's happening is the Democrats are actually cannibalizing their own votes. The people that would normally have gone to vote day of election, well, they're voting early. And so they're getting all their voters out, and there's nothing left for them to vote on day of election. Now here with Michigan, where we get really interesting here, because Michigan and Wisconsin really is that they are both leading. Trump is leading both Michigan and Wisconsin. In this case, Michigan by 2 percentage points, mailed in ballots returned. that is a nightmare right now for the Democrats. And if you take in consideration that there will probably another drop in Detroit area, and that there's a strong rural turnout in Michigan, and that Trafalgar poll, it now has Trump up Michigan by 1 point, and it just doesn't look good. Remember, Democrats have to be leading by a huge number to make up the difference of the Republicans that decide to come, which would be most of them, to vote for Trump on election day. And also, not just that, but Democrats aren't really even voting for Democrats. And we're seeing a big shift. We're seeing a realignment of massive proportions. If you look back at 2016, you had Hillary Clinton, an article here where it says Clinton enjoys solid lead in early voting. It's a Reuters Ipsos poll. It says that with 11 days to go before the election, 2016, Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton leads Republican Donald Trump by 15 percentage points among early voters surveyed in just 2 weeks, according to Reuters and Ipsos. It goes on to say, though data is not available for all early votes, Clinton enjoys an edge in swing states such as Ohio, Arizona, and Republican states such as Texas and Georgia. Also says, an estimate 19 million Americans have voted so far in the election, according to the University of Florida's United States Election Project, accounting for as much as 20% of the electorate. And finally, overall, Clinton remained on track to win a majority of votes in the Electoral College, the Reuters Ipsos survey showed. Now, the question I ask is, how did that work for you? It didn't, because what we're seeing is, in that election, almost 200 counties, we mentioned this before in another video, 200 counties in the Rust Belt, which prior to that, going back to 1984, Dukakis and Mondale, all that, all the way up to Clinton and Obama and Kerry and all of them, every single election, the average Democrat victory was 20 points. They all flipped for Trump, all of them. Moreover, they flipped on the average of 20 points each, which means we're talking about a 40-point swing in the Rust Belt, and we're seeing that number continuing on. We're seeing the youth vote go down. We're seeing the black vote go down. We're seeing a lot of things. I'm going to talk about some more metrics as we go forward. And Wisconsin and Michigan, I am putting them strongly in the red column. And so that brings Trump out right now at 215. And so he's right there. Okay. So next state we're just going to talk about North Carolina real quickly. I'm not going to bring that up because there's a 21-point lead for Democrats in that area. And that is probably going to be eradicated because a lot of those people in North Carolina are Democrats older who end up voting Republican. That's just how it works. And that lead may not be big enough. Right now it's about 300,000 lead, but that number is actually getting smaller, and look for that to get tighter and for North Carolina to also go red as well. Let's take a look at Georgia. Georgia's another one. Right now it's about a 200,000 lead, but it's still not enough because there's a huge rural vote base in Georgia, and that's going to be enough to make that up because that lead right now, the 19 points that Georgia has for Democrats, I don't believe it's going to be strong enough to carry that. So let's also color in Arizona. And with this, for various reasons, we're going to color these back in the blue because Nevada probably is going to end up going Democrat with the numbers we're seeing. So for Minnesota, I'm going to put that in the leans blue department simply because of what happened in 2016. The numbers seem to be the same. Unless there's a civil unrest backlash, I don't see that flipping. It very well could though, but this is a conservative estimate. So again, we're not basing it off anything other than what we see from the last election and what we're seeing on the ground right now. There's a plus 19 difference between mail-in ballots for Democrats and Republicans. And so for Pennsylvania, unfortunately, I also put that into the leans Democrat because there's some numbers that are coming in that just don't make any sense. And people are actually barking at the governor, Wolf, for the policies he's putting in place for the counting and the ballots. And there's so much going on there that it doesn't make sense. And I won't have time to get into all the details, but this is going to be a state that's definitely going to be after the election. It's going to be counting and counting and counting. And I think maybe Trump will have enough votes anyway the day of the election that it won't even matter. If you remember before where Michigan actually wasn't called for like a few weeks after the election, I think Pennsylvania will be one of those again this time, simply because of their governor and the way things are being done on the ground there. And so here you have it here, Trump 286 and Biden 252. And this also plays along with States poll, who has basically the same thing here. They have the same numbers here, and they based it based on exit polls, voter analysis, party ID, vote by mail, and in person. And so they basically have it 284 to Biden 233. They're picking it as well, but this is still a very tight scenario. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a couple other scenarios as to why it could be a landslide in Trump's favor. And I kind of mentioned that before, but the thing is, you have to understand that there are some serious problems that the Democrats have to overcome. And let's just get into that real quickly. So we're going to reset the map to here, and we're going to go over the scenarios of what I think could happen if things break the right way. So I mentioned the 200 counties that in the Rust Belt flipped for Trump in 2016. 200 counties, almost that many, flipped for Trump, who have been voting since 1984 every single year without fail for Democrats by 20 points or more. Turned around in 1 year, flipped, and went to Trump by 20 points or more. That is what you call a realignment. Also, white people who did not have college voted in such a high volume that even if Hillary Clinton had gotten Barack Obama's numbers, it wouldn't have mattered. She still would have lost. And so that's another key factor to understand. So now, before we continue on, let's talk about some other states like North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And so I mentioned about the voter count in North Carolina, how it was heavily favored for Democrats. Well, North Carolina vote by mail usually slanted towards Democrats relative to other states because older Republicans in North Carolina still tend to be registered as Democrats. And it goes into all this. I'll leave a link here on all this. It goes into a lot of information that I don't want to cover. But you do see how the numbers are coming down and Republican numbers are coming up. We're seeing the same thing happening in Florida. And so that's not be a concern, which is why I basically have North Carolina being a safe seat for Trump. Let's talk about Pennsylvania. There's some court decisions here, and you can cover all that here. And why I said that before, Pennsylvania is probably going to be a state that's going to be counting past election day and may even go to the Supreme Court. Who knows? Right now, Pennsylvania is crazy. So now lastly, let's talk about the youth vote and one of the biggest voting blocks for Democrats in the past few election cycles. Well, here's one thing they didn't consider. Okay, they wanted to, again, take the vote, early voting, and run the numbers up. Republicans come in enthusiastic on election day. They meet the number and surpass it. And then after that, they add on more votes and they get court cases and whatever they want to do to delay, whatever they need to do to match that number and win. So basically, they want to know how much of the lead they have, and so they would know how much votes to fabricate, essentially. I mean, let's just be honest, all right? So the problem is, with this COVID lockdown, they've scared their voter base so badly that they pretty much put all of their eggs in one basket. That's going to be early voting and nothing for day of. But one other thing is that most campuses are locked down and closed, and so there's no resources in place to get people to the polls. So Larry's saying in his tweets here is basically that the campuses are locked down because of the COVID, and all of this hysteria has taken away their main get out the vote base. The souls to the polls, that's not going to happen because there's no one to do it. And to make that up, they have to actually get 30% above for that demographic youth vote in vote by mail to make up the difference. And right now, the votes are just not there. In fact, in Dane County, Wisconsin, home of the University of Wisconsin and one of America's most liberal college towns, the youth vote has declined from 8% in 2016 to now 7.3. This came as a big surprise as 27% of the total 2016 vote is already in, and the Wisconsin youth vote was expected to be energized. Check this out. In Philadelphia, home of Temple University, Drexel University, Pennsylvania, LaSalle University, the 18 to 29 youth vote has gone from 23% in 2016 and 12.5 in the midterms to 11.7 in 2020 now. That is panic time because those are two states that you're going to pretty much lose simply because you don't have people on the ground to do it. And here's another thing that I have here is that the Democrats don't appear to have much of a ground game. President Trump's campaign manager said this. His name is Bill Stepien. And by the way, he's done a fantastic job since they've gotten rid of Brad Parscale, his former campaign manager, back in July. Ever since then, the campaign's taken a turn and it's done really, really well since then. He said, quote, "We are more confident today than any point in the campaign. The Democrats are not getting the early returns they need because they don't have a ground game." Now, who has ever heard that the Democrats don't have a ground game? Well, one's because Joe Biden is just not that much of an enthusiastic character. The enthusiasm is just bad. Joe Biden is a horrible candidate. We all know this. But also the lockdowns. People are scared to go outside unless, of course, they're rioting. And so those riots also hurt Joe Biden as well. So they don't want to do that either because that would be, something else they have to worry about. So with that, they have basically cannibalized their votes. They have squashed off their youth votes and they have locked down people to the point that they're going to come in early and not show up on election day and not have the turnout they need later to make that up. Well, with Amy Coney Barrett being sworn in probably by Saturday, that's going to be even more difficult because she's going to uphold the Constitution and they're not going to be able to hold these dates out longer and longer and longer because, number one, the Trump campaign has lawyered up in all these key battleground states. They're watching this election like a hawk. And they've pretty much said that it's going to be 3 days after the election that they have to count those votes. That's going to be it. And anything else is going to have to go through the courts and have to be appealed, maybe even to the Supreme Court. And if you have someone like Amy Coney Barrett there and the 6-3 conservative, constructionist, originalist majority, guess what? That's going to be in Trump's favor. And so these are all the factors that I have that I can say. I said a lot of stuff today that lead me to believe that Trump is going to win. And let me just show you this one last thing here. This is from, not that one. This is one by Real Election Analysis. This guy here has the campaign looking like this, where he has all the states I mentioned before, Nevada, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania going in the Trump column, giving him an excess of actually 326 to 212. We saw in the first analysis where Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota were all in the blue column, but you can see how that can switch really easily. So to be safe, we put them blue, kept it conservative in that way, but Trump has a clear path to victory. Don't let people tell you otherwise. The national polls don't mean anything right now. What means the most right now is what we're seeing on the ground and typically how people are going to be enthusiastic to come to the polls. It's wide open. It could be a really close race or it could be an absolute landslide from what we're seeing right now with these numbers. And so that's it. So what do you think? Did you like what I did? Did you like the analysis? Did it go over your head? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think that Trump could win this by a big margin or a small margin or even not at all? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be curious to know what you think. And if you like what we do on this channel where I take culture, TV, movies, and politics and news and filter it to you the right way, then please hit the like and subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss any future content. And please click the join button if you want to tag along with us and support this channel. We would be really appreciative of that. As always, please check out some content that we have right